Hello, how are you? I'm doing fairly well. I've almost fully recovered from my fall a couple weeks ago when I very stupidly fell off from the library ladder in my study. And I still have quite a lot of bruising on that side of my body, and it's quite tender and sore if I put any pressure on it or if I lie on that side of my body. But it is doing a lot better. So thanks very much for all of your good wishes and concern about it. I am still not able to exercise because if I do any sort of exercise, it does hurt quite a lot. And in a way, I'm sort of the lazy side of me is sort of happy about that because it means I can just lie around reading all the time. But I know that's not healthy and that I need to get back to exercising as soon as I can after I've sort of recovered enough from this. I'm going to get into talking about the books I read over the course of November. I've read a lot of really interesting books and have lots of thoughts about them. And I'd love to know if you've read any of these books and have any responses to them or want to have a chat about them in the comments below. I have loved reading Anthony Trollope and getting into reading him for the first time. I'm so glad I joined in this big read that the Trollope Society is doing centered around his books. And so I did read the Warden first, even though the big read is around Barchester Towers. So because I wanted to read the first book that is part of the Barsetshire series of books, of 6 books, and the Warden is the first in that. And I think, partly what has made this such a pleasurable experience is that it's sort of harkening back to the mid 19th century and these sort of relatively small town concerns of the individuals and characters of this story, rather than sort of stressing and worrying about these big global concerns. They're just sort of concerned with what's happening in the community in this relatively small issue of Mr. Harding, who's the warden of this charitable organization, a charitable hospital, and has been receiving a lot more funds than probably was intended when this charitable organization was set up. And that's called into question by a man. And partly what I like about how he approaches this is, I know this plays out so differently than it would in today's society, where Mr. Harding would, be canceled and there would be this big sort of scandal and around him, and he would be sort of forced out of his position. And there is like a newspaper article written about this issue, which kind of publicly shames him. But at the same time, he takes this on so much that, and sort of becomes such an issue of self-scrutiny that he wonders himself if he should have this role, if he should be getting these funds. And there's this wonderful reversal that takes place between him and the man that accuses him, where they sort of switch positions. And that's kind of funny in itself as like a plot device, but also, it sort of shows this way where they have quite like sympathetic attitudes and have a really reasonable approach to these things, rather than it becoming this big strident public debate where, you get people on social media like shouting on both sides of the issue, that it's just all sort of handled locally. And also, like, I've just been enjoying the narration of this, because obviously it's a 19th century work, so it's so different than novels today. And part of what I enjoy so much about it is that the author intervenes quite a lot in the story and is quite biased and makes his opinions known. And like there's this wonderful section where he's describing a family in quite a lot of detail, and it's quite like interesting. They seem like a nice normal family, but he keeps having these sort of shady comments where he'll say but they're essentially quite dull. And so he'll have this kind of dismissive attitude about some of the characters, and just this very like funny and cutting way, and I find that quite amusing. But also there's also so much wonderful period detail in this about like the mechanics of everyday life in terms of like finance and details of inside people's houses and in-shop windows. There's this wonderful section towards the end of the book where Mr. Harding is having a walk through London as he's waiting for an appointment that he's due to have, and he walks up the Strand and goes to Westminster Abbey. And I love, reading these novels set in this historical context where it's since I live in London, I know these locations very well because they're these historic locations, and yeah, you get this sort of layered sense of time, like reading about how he experienced this side of London, as opposed to how I experienced this side of London, and that's such a wonderful section. And yeah, there's just quite a lot in this that I really enjoyed and appreciated, and I think that probably does have a lot to do with the context of our current times, and so I'm so happy that I have this whole series of books now to look forward to. And I have moved on now to reading Barchester Towers, which a lot of people cite as the more sort of fun and engaging. It's one of his most popular books, and I can see that because there is a lot of much more like overt scandal in this book, and characters which are more sharply drawn in their sort of opinions, and I think he sort of hones down how and concentrates how these characters are pitted against each other. And there's quite a lot of characters in this, and quite a lot that have their own particular aims and things that they want to get across and are sort of vying for. I mean, they're still up for debate who's going to be warden of this, and this debate is continuing on in this novel, partly in a way that does grow slightly tedious to me. I mean, it's like the same argument that's being rehashed again and again about who's going to be warden. Then another position comes up in the local community, and there's again like endless debate about who's gonna take that position, but the characters are so funny. There's like a newly appointed bishop in this who's basically a pawn between these different very strong-willed characters, and it's just sort of funny how he's sort of bandied about between them and manipulated by them. So that does come across very funny. There's some very awkward party scenes in this where there are kind of confrontations between people, and so it is quite dramatic and funny in that way, but like in a kind of low key kind of way, and there are some other aspects of it I feel like where the author intuition doesn't work so well. Like there's a character named Mr. Slope who's very sort of cunning and ambitious, and he delivers this big sermon, and Anthony Trollope doesn't want to reproduce that sermon or even describe very strictly the contents of that sermon, but then there's a whole fallout from that. And I found that quite frustrating because I want to know what he actually said in the sermon, because so many characters react to it, and I can kind of get what was said in it from their reactions, but at the same time, like I would have liked to have actually known what he actually said. So yeah, there are some points in it which I find a bit frustrating, but like overall, it's such a pleasurable read, and I'm about maybe 3/4 of the way through it. So I'm really eager to see how it's all going to play out, and what alliances are going to hold up, and yeah, what's going to happen with all of it. So yeah, I'm enjoying reading Anthony Trollope so much, and and like I said when I started this project, it is making me feel this nice connection with my grandmother, since my paternal grandmother's favorite author was Anthony Trollope, and to think that she read these novels too and enjoyed them, and so yeah, that's a sort of lovely connection to have. My Booker Prize reading, I also read Burnt Sugar and The New Wilderness, and I already talked about these books quite extensively in my Booker predictions video, so I'm going to be fairly brief about this. Although a wonderful thing which I failed to mention in the videos yet was that back in September I actually placed a bet on Shuggie Bain winning the Booker Prize this year, and I put the maximum bet possible on that, which was like £16 and something. I don't know why there was a maximum bet that could be placed. But yeah, I put that on it, and so I won almost £100 on betting that Shuggie Bain would win. I'm so glad that I did that, and I'm so glad that I read Shuggie Bain first, because I think if I had read Burnt Sugar, I might have bet on this winning over Shuggie Bain. So, but yeah, anyway, it sort of paid off, and this is my kind of I'm sort of happy this happened because on the Women's Prize, Anna James placed a bet on that, and she won quite a lot of money betting that Hamnet would win. And I wasn't able to go and place a bet in enough time. They'd closed betting before I went on to try to make a bet, and so I missed out on making a bet for that. But yeah, I've sort of made up for it now with the Booker Prize, and I wish there wasn't a maximum bet that could be placed on it, because I think I would have won quite a lot more money. I would have happily put a much bigger bet on Shuggie Bain winning. Anyway, that doesn't really have anything to do with the quality of the books, but it's just sort of a fun thing since I follow book prizes, and if only I could make my living from just betting off from book prizes. I mean, it'd be quite a precarious living to have, but it'd be quite fun to do. Anyway, yes, Burnt Sugar. I love this novel, and I'm not mad at all about Shuggie Bain winning, but I sort of hope that more people read this as well, and I'm glad that it did get the recognition it did by being shortlisted for the Booker Prize, because it's such a compelling novel, and it's one that I've continued to think about more and more as time goes on. And I think that's a really good sign with fiction about this very tense mother-daughter relationship, and the way she shows the complexity of that. I mean, it's really made me think about my own personal memories and subjective perspective, and because we do have this thing with our memories, particularly of childhood. If there are certain memories we have, we'll think about them over and over again, and it's so artful the way that she shows how in that continuously going over it process, we're actually revising that and sort of probably altering these memories in certain ways. And so we get, I think, further away from this objective sense of what actually happened and probably the truth of what actually happened, and that will probably always remain unknowable. And the narrator of this grows increasingly unreliable over the course of the novel, and you start to question more and more whether her memories are genuine and her perspective is right, and you start thinking more about the mother's perspective. And I thought it was so clever how she did that, while obviously not forgiving the mother, because the mother was quite negligent towards her when she was a child in different ways, but at the same time, the way her actions now, I'm not going to give away the plot of what happens, but yeah, become very suspect in themselves, and so I think it's so fascinating and so well done. So yeah, I'm really excited to read more by this author. Hopefully she'll publish another book, and yeah, it's so interesting with The New Wilderness how it differently explores a mother-daughter relationship in a very different context in this novel, in this kind of dystopian context, and I did find a lot of their relationship really interesting, and what happens to it over time as the situation changes and becomes increasingly tense, and the choices they make, and just the pressure that's placed upon this relationship given the context of the world that they live in. I think is really interesting and fascinatingly done. But yeah, I just didn't buy the whole dystopian context of how she set this up and all the rules of it, and that really impeded my enjoyment of the story. But I did think there were strong aspects of it, but yeah, I just honestly found myself going a bit bored throughout reading this novel. So yeah, it was interesting, but just not entirely successful for me. And then I did read Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, the book that has been on some of these best books of the year lists, and many people responded in the comments saying definitely read Caste, and I'm so glad I did. So I listened to it on audiobook, and it's about 500 pages long, and I really appreciated the different point of view that this book gave me, because I somewhat naively think sometimes, even though I understand the history of America and the complicated social dynamics which, have led to the continuous oppression of non-white American citizens. But at the same time, sometimes I do still wonder, why do we have these problems with racism still, when it sort of feels like with the legislation and social progress, like we should be getting beyond this, and it's not changing. There are still these examples continuously in the news of blatantly racist attacks, and I know that's like quite like a naive position, but I think the way that Wilkerson posits this argument is so fascinating by sort of shifting the conversation from race to caste, to understand why these systems are still in place and are so embedded in the psychology of everyone from the society, that there are innumerable unconscious and conscious prejudices that we still have within us, and that play out in many different ways in society, and she gives so many concrete historic examples of why this is, and draws really interesting comparisons with Nazi Germany and the caste system in India, which in India, it's a very long-standing tradition and issue within the country. And then in Nazi Germany, she points out this absolutely fascinating historical fact that when the Nazis were trying to come up with legislation, anti-Jewish legislation, that they were looking to America and America's oppression of its black citizen and the history of slavery and the ways that they were able to legally go about that as inspiration for their own legislation. And I never really thought of that before, although it seems kind of obvious that they would have been looking at these historical examples of that, and so that was quite like shocking to read about and gave me quite a different perspective. But yeah, there are so many examples she gives from history, but also her own personal history as an African-American woman, and one who is a journalist and often in spaces that are largely composed of white men, that she finds herself the victim of oppression in many different ways, and rather than pointing the blame and sort of naming and shaming different individuals or organizations who have been racist towards her, she talks about how she recognizes that these are the products of a larger caste system that America lives under. And I think that's such an important way to think about it. I mean, obviously, the people who do commit racist actions should be called out and held to account for them. But we also need to recognize that this is sort of a larger continuing issue. And so when you talk about the police force and police brutality and that can sometimes be dismissed as there's just a few bad apples within the system, that if we can just root those out and get rid of them, then it'll be fixed. But that won't fix things, because this is going to continue to happen, because there are these larger issues with the system of caste and hierarchies within the society. And so we really need to consciously think about that and be vigilant to that and pay attention to that. And so, yeah, I thought it was so fascinating how this book gives a very different context and understanding of all of these much larger issues within society. I also read another prize book, which is Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu, which recently won the National Book Award, and is about an actor named Willis Wu, who is in this ongoing series, detective series, called Black and White, and he often plays the generic Asian man in the background, but he aspires to be the kung fu guy, which he sees sees as the sort of ultimate role that he can play. And it is so inventive and funny how the author goes about writing his story. So it is written in this script style of where you follow the TV series, but also his sort of imagining of the lives of other people in Chinatown as if it were in a script in a ongoing TV series, and so reality becomes blended with this sort of TV world. And in many parts I felt like he was almost like a video game character where he was playing out these different scenarios within the TV series and in order to try to climb the ladder to have a more major role within the story. And it's quite like a I think common thing for us to sort of envision ourselves as the protagonist of our own like movie or TV series. And so I think it's quite like funny and playful how he uses that within the story, but it sort of goes beyond that as the lines become much more blurred, and you also start to see the integrity of certain characters outside of the context of the roles that they're made to play, and it is quite poignant, that they're that many of the characters feel like they have to play these roles within the series because it's the only roles that they're allowed to be given in the casting, but also how they have to play these roles out in real life in the real world as well. And it's quite like obvious some of the points that he makes, but as the novel goes on, I think it does become more complex as he goes into the psychology of this like internalized racism, and he sort of realizes that there are more possibilities for him, and there are other people in his life like a romantic interest in his brother, which sort of help him break out of that understanding. But at the same time, it's all quite like bombastic and funny how he goes about it. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm glad that the prize sort of highlighted this and made me want to read it. Now, I was very kindly sent the novel Parakeet by Marie-Helene Bertino by Matthew Sciarappa, the wonderful booktuber, who made a video gushing about how this is his favorite novel of the year. And he said to me, like, you need to read this novel. So he very kindly sent me a copy of it. And I'm so glad he did, because I really enjoyed reading about it. So it's about a woman, a nameless narrator, who's just sort of referred to as the bride, who is in the 2 weeks before her wedding takes place. She's staying in a hotel and sort of making the final preparations for it. But then a parakeet arrives in her hotel room and makes a mess all over her wedding dress and sort of destroys it. So she has to get another wedding dress. And the parakeet she knows is her dead grandmother, who's sort of come back and is sort of telling her not to get married and to seek out her estranged brother. And so she goes on this very surreal journey where it's so interesting how there are different scenes which are kind of play with memory and her own personal memories, but then are sort of going through reality as well. So there's this whole scene where she's her brother's written this play based on her early life, and she's watching this play enacted of her early life in a way that she kind of disagrees with and sees differences of. And how I was talking about with Avni Doshi's novel, like the ways of looking at memory, and so I think she's sort of getting at the way that we kind of revise our memories and think about them in different ways, and it becomes abstracted from reality as especially as we carry on, and our family members can sometimes have a very different point of view about what happened in the past from what we have, and I think that's so interesting, and that plays out in a number of different scenes of where these sort of memories are blended with reality, and really time and space start to shift in this odd way. Like there's all of these scenes in like elevators and corridors where the physical space doesn't really make entire sense at all, and there's also this curious doubling effect where a woman she goes to buy a new dress from is sort of her double, and a man that she had an affair with is now with this woman, and so it's sort of looking at these alternative lives that she could have had. And then also it's really interesting the connection with her sibling that she reforms over the course of the novel, the way that plays out. I don't want to give any spoilers about what happens, but that's so interesting how that's done. And so yeah, I thought it's a really fascinating novel, and I really appreciate and enjoy this kind of absurdist literature. It reminded me of sort of like a kind of like Beckett play, and she even self-consciously like invokes some authors, I think like Beckett and other authors that have that kind of absurdist sensibility in their writing. So yeah, I thought this was really fascinating and enjoyable. And again, it was so kind of Matthew to send me this. I mean, there's no better thing than getting a book in the mail from someone who's really like physically urging you on and saying you have to read this book. I mean, that's such a great recommendation. I read the collection of poetry My Darling from the Lines by Rachel Lawn, which has such a beautiful cover. And this is the poetry book which is shortlisted in the poetry category of this year's Caste Book Awards. And I wanted to try out something from some of the other categories as well. And I thought it was so interesting over the course of these poems how you get this understanding of the sensibility and character of a distinct personality by reading about them. It's almost like an impressionistic understanding of their life, since you get so many snippets which are just small moments. I mean, some of the poems concentrate on actual historical moments from her past when she's recalling something at a particular time, and you see how it plays out and the various conflicts going on in that situation. And then other poems are more abstract, sort of looking at a certain idea or kind of sensibility that she's looking at. And I think some of the poems I enjoyed and appreciated the most were ones that are looking about her relationship with her mother, where she will see this sort of private moment where she will find her diary, or she'll observe her parents holding hands in the car, and this gives her sort of a different perspective on her mother from when in other poems there's this wonderful poem called Orb, where she describes how her mother like puts her hair up in this ball and becomes this very imposing figure and a figure of curiosity and envy amongst people around her, and so yeah, it sort of gives you this sort of different insight of our relationships with people that are close to us, but also her emerging sensibility. And one of the poems I absolutely loved was called The Music Box, which is looking at the physical object of a music box and kind of meditating on the history of it and the importance of it and relevancy it had in the intimate life of individuals before her, and now how it's still this object that's still here. I found that so poignant. I also read The Swallowed Man by Edward Carey, a novel which takes on the character of Geppetto from Pinocchio and tells his story from his point of view while he's trapped within the whale when he goes out searching for his son in the ocean, and he becomes trapped in this whale. And he tells his story as he discovers this ship inside this whale and a box of candles and some hardtack, some food to sustain him. And it's so interesting how he does this. I mean, there's various illustrations throughout it, which this is the part where he dresses himself. He's sort of talking about his baldness, and he dresses himself in some dried sea things, which he puts on top of his head and tries to use as a toupee. And so there are some aspects of that are quite funny, but overall I think it's a very poignant novel looking at loneliness, because if you think about the story of Pinocchio, I mean, what bigger expression of loneliness is there when we look at inanimate objects and then give them a consciousness and sort of play out these scenarios with them? I mean, it's such a kind of cry of like loneliness, and the way he writes his character, it's so moving, the loneliness you feel from him, and just the context of this. I mean, it's such a fantastical context, but that he's a being which is trapped inside this much larger being, which has no sort of idea that he's there or care about him being there. So he's kind of squashed in these circumstances which grow increasingly dire, and how he as he's living in this whale, and he makes all these drawings, and he tries to carve out other figures to have a relationship with, and he meditates on his past and his difficult family life, how in the pottery business where they sort of designed things on pottery in his family business, and how his father was very harsh on him, and yeah, so he had a very unhappy family life, and then he was very unlucky in love with a series of women, and so yeah, he's just in this incredibly lonely position, and I found that so poignant of a way of looking at loneliness, and the narrative grows increasingly hallucinatory as it sort of goes on, because he's, I think, becoming increasingly estranged from reality, as he's just sort of stuck within his own world within this whale, and so yeah, I found it very sad, but also really fascinating and very touching novel. And then finally, in a slightly more upbeat way, I want to talk about a novel which is slightly unusual for me, called The Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman, which is a novel I wouldn't normally be drawn to, because it's a sort of mystery whodunit type story, and kind of Agatha Christie style, and I'm not really naturally drawn to those types of stories, but this has been getting so much praise by a lot of readers that I really admire and appreciate their opinions. So I wanted to try it out, and I'm so glad I did, because it's a very funny and engaging novel that also says something, I think, moving and meaningful. So it's about 4 characters who are in their 70s and living in a retirement village, and it's their sort of personal hobby on Thursday to get together and look over old police cases that have gone cold and see if that they can solve them. But then when a murder takes place within their own village, they want to investigate this and see if they can solve it themselves. And so it's about the mystery of that. But more, I think, than that, it's about the mystery of these characters and their past lives, because they led such different and fascinating lives from each other, and you get little bits and pieces of their past, but not the whole picture. So I think it's also about the ongoing mystery of who these characters are, especially as they're older characters. They're often dismissed by the younger people in the community, but really they're a wealth of information, have a wealth of information and experience, and also ongoing curiosity and drive, and there's so many humorous interactions with each other, but also as the narrative flips between their different perspectives. Like, quite often when that happens in a novel, I'll sort of favor one perspective over another, and I'll sort of race through wanting to get back to that character, but I didn't find that in this. I really enjoyed each of their stories, though I did, I think probably my favorite was Elizabeth, who is so cunning and clever and really insistent in wanting to get what she wants, and I found her really endearing and interesting and fascinating. She used to work as a spy, so she has this whole fascinating backstory. And I did find as it went on, and the plot played out, and we sort of went through like who did do it, that I did get a little bit impatient with that side of the story, because I just wanted to get on with that. The sort of structure of this type of story is that the author intentionally withholds information and different interactions and conversations in order to sort of strain out the tension of who did it, and I just don't really care, because I feel like because it is so controlled by the author that I don't really care who actually did it, but I did find it really moving how he develops the characters, and that these are characters that are late in their life, and so having to make some really tough decision about their own path going forward, and also the path of their people that they're close to. Like, there's one character who her husband is starting to experience dementia, and so she has to make some really hard decisions about what's going to happen with him. And so yeah, I found it very touching and moving in how he develops those characters. But moreover, it's just like they're so endearing and funny that they were just a pleasure to read about. So even though this isn't normally my type of fiction, I did really enjoy this and thought it was a real pleasure to read. So those are all of the books that I read over the course of November. Like I said, let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts about them or want to have a discussion about them, or let me know if you're interested in reading any of these now. But also I'd be really curious to hear about some of the best things you've read over the month of November. So hope you're doing well, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.